All right, everyone, I'm going to get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Braverman, and I am honored to stand before you today as the Lehigh Friends of Israel president. Today marks a significant occasion as we gather to delve into one of the most complex and sensitive issues of our time, the ongoing conflict between the State of Israel and Palestine. It is with great excitement and anticipation that we welcome our distinguished guest, Charlotte Korchak, to our campus. Charlotte is not only the director of student programming with Stand With Us, but she is also a passionate advocate for peace and a fighter against anti-Semitism. Her dedication to fostering understanding and dialogue is truly commendable. With a degree in Middle Eastern history from the University of Southern California, Charlotte brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the table. Her insights are invaluable as we seek to explore the nuances of this multifaceted issue. Before we proceed, I would like to emphasize the importance of a respectful and constructive dialogue. Tonight's program is designed to promote understanding and mutual respect. We are recording this event to ensure everyone's safety. However, no one who is not authorized is not allowed to record. Let me be clear, disruption of any kind is not tolerated. It is against both state law and campus policy under the policy on freedom of thought, inquiry, expression, and dissent by students to disrupt a lawful meeting such as this one. In addition, if you have any signage that you decide to hold up that would block the view of any audience member, you will be asked to leave. We are committed to maintaining a safe and respectful environment for all attendees. If anyone chooses to disrupt, we will take our appropriate action to remove the individual or individuals to ensure the integrity of our discussion. With that said, I urge you all to engage openly and respectfully in tonight's conversation. Let us listen with open minds, learn from one another, and strive towards a deeper understanding of this complex issue. Without further ado, please join me in extending a warm welcome to Charlotte Korchak. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for attending. I do want to just say it because I think there's also a legality to me saying it out loud. So in case anyone is privately recording this, this is on Zoom, which means that it's being recorded. So everything that I'm saying now is recorded. And I'm saying it now that if you do not have permission explicitly from me to be recording this, it is illegal to now be recording me. So if any recording goes up online of this meeting that from somebody who was not approved, legal action will be taken. And I only say that because we live in a world of AI and we live in a world of a tremendous amount of lies and distortion, specifically on this topic. And so I, unfortunately, as a speaker who puts myself out there every single day, has to be incredibly careful about where things are put and specifically how things are spliced out of context, which happens often in our world. So that's why I'm saying it. So again, explicitly, if you do not have permission to record, I highly encourage you to turn off your recording device right now, because I will not hesitate to take legal action. I have about 200 pro bono attorneys who are ready to take that legal action, and it will not cost me a dime. Yeah, so now is the time to turn off your recording device. With that, I want to go back to exactly what was said, which is I really am here to start a conversation. I am here to answer questions respectfully. I will be taking questions, not comments. So make sure that when you do ask a question, you frame it as a question and you ask it quickly, because other people will also want to be asking questions. And we're not in a place where somebody else is going to stand up and make a speech. Now with that, thank you all for coming. Like was said, I'm Charlotte Korchak. I'm the International Senior Educator for Stand With Us. I've been working for this organization now for 14 years. We really started out studying this topic 18 years ago. So I spent half my life now studying this topic, both professionally in school. I got a BA in Middle Eastern History from the University of Southern California. But I've also been studying this independently for the last 14 years of my life since graduating from university. I live in Jerusalem today. I've been living in Israel for 11 years this round. I also lived there as a teenager from age 9 to 14, almost 15, where I went through the second Intifada. Which means that I'm also somebody who stands up here and has faced terror head on. A suicide bomber, when I was 14 years old, walked up to a group of my friends who were out eating pizza on a Saturday night. The entire crowd were teenagers. There wasn't actually one adult standing in that space. And a suicide bomber walked right up to the middle of my friend, stood right next to my friend Nehemiah, and blew himself up. He blew my friend Nehemiah's head off. His body was found by his older brother. My other friend, Karen, took the brunt of the shrapnel, nails and screws that penetrated her body. She died a few hours later. My other friend, who took a nail to the head, spent 11 days in the hospital and then died of a wound. There's a lot of suffering in this conflict. And just like I told you a story, most Israelis can tell you another story similar to that, especially post-October 7th. I have a friend, colleague of mine, who lost 9 of her friends on that one day. They were murdered in cold blood while they were at a faith festival, a music festival. That's actually a music festival that celebrates peace. And they were specifically told not to bring any weapons with them, which is why they had no ability to defend themselves from the terrorists who terrorized in and came in on trucks and shot them to death. This conflict is incredibly personal to Israelis, and it's also incredibly personal to us. As pretty much every single Palestinian can also share with you a story of a loved one, of a friend, of a family member who's been killed. This is a conflict that unfortunately has a tremendous amount of tragedy around it, and a lot of pain on both sides, which is why it is such an emotionally charged issue for so many people who are intimately involved. On top of that, when things happen in Israel, it spreads throughout the world. And today, Jewish students on campus feel scared. And I know this because I travel campuses every single day, and every day students come up to me and either in tears or shaking talk to me about their fears being a Jew on campus today. So again, emotionally charged and incredibly personal. And I understand that in that kind of environment, it's not easy to communicate, but we're going to do our best because that's how we're going to break the divide. We need to find a way to communicate. I would argue the biggest issue today in the Middle East, and specifically between the Israelis and the Palestinians, is that we don't talk to each other, which means we don't understand each other's suffering enough. We also don't know each other's stories enough. I don't just try to come from an Israeli perspective. I'm a scholar on this topic. So I've studied this topic in academia, which obviously is not coming from one side or the other. Well, at least when I was in school, it didn't come from one side or the other. That was 18 years ago. Things have kind of changed in academia in the last 15 years, tragically. But I've also spent much of my time over the last 11 years in Israel talking to Palestinians, reading their narrative, hearing from them. I sat in the PLO offices in Ramallah and heard it straight from the horse's mouth. I sat in the Palestinian Security Forces offices in Bethlehem and heard somebody, part of the Palestinian Security Forces, accuse me of creating and encouraging ISIS. I have sat in Palestinian homes, true story, I was shocked as well when it was said. I have stood in the home, sat in the home many times actually, of a Palestinian who lives directly across from the Cave of the Patriarchs, or the Ibrahimi Mosque, and heard his story of what it's like to live there every single day with soldiers literally outside of his door, and the harassment that he has experienced from those soldiers, and I've witnessed it myself. I have spoken, I have a friend who's a Palestinian who lives in Bethlehem. We've spent many times sitting together talking about this conflict, trying to better understand each other's perspectives. I come at this from a place of incredible empathy and compassion for my Palestinian neighbors. I stand here and I will start this by saying that I don't want any innocent people to die in this conflict. I would really love it if this conflict could end and not one more innocent person needs to die. Israeli, Palestinian, or anyone in between, because we should also note that many non-Israelis and non-Palestinians were killed on October 7th. Thai workers who were just coming to study agriculture in Israel were slaughtered on October 7th. Many of them were taken hostage as well. Many Arab Israelis were killed on that day. Muslims. In fact, a Muslim is still being held hostage. I wear a few things around my neck every day to remind myself of certain things. One of them is a dog tag that says bring them home now. That's for all the hostages. Another one has a specific name of a hostage on it, and the name is Muhammad bin Samira al-Washash. He's a Muslim who is being held right now by Hamas in captivity. So again, this conflict runs through many people, and I try to see every person as a person. The only time when you lose that status is when you are trying to kill them. Once you put a gun in your hand, once you strap a bomb to yourself, once you launch a rocket that's aimed at a city, you've lost that status. You are officially a combatant, and you have opened yourself up to being killed. That's how the world works. Until that moment, as far as I'm concerned, you're not combatant. Once you're trying to kill me, the compassion is gone. So when we talk about what's going on today in Israel, the problem is that there's too much context that most people don't understand. The average person woke up on October 7th and maybe read a headline about what was happening and probably never read another headline about what was happening and has no idea the depths of what happened on October 7th. And then once October 7th happened, slowly but surely, we started to hear, well, it didn't start on October 7th. Of course, I'm a historian. It definitely didn't start on October 7th. And then I was told, but it started 75 years ago. Well, I'm a historian and it definitely didn't start 75 years ago. This conflict is rooted in ancient history because there are two peoples in that land who deeply, deeply believe that that land is their home. And no matter how much I try to tell one or the other that it's not their home, it is their home. And that did not start 75 years ago. It didn't start 100 years ago. And it didn't start 1,000 years ago. It started 3,000 years ago. So when somebody says it didn't start on October 7th, I fully agree with that. But to go back to 1975 is also, or excuse me, 75 years ago to 1948 is also wildly problematic. Because you are also starting in the middle of the story. So what I want to do is I want to quickly trace what are the roots of this story. Why is there a conflict going on between the Israelis and the Palestinians? And I want to start by explaining that this conflict didn't start as an Israeli or Palestinian conflict. It started as what we would call the Arab-Jewish conflict. Why the Arab-Jewish conflict? Because at the time that the conflict started, the people living there did not identify as Israelis or as Palestinians. The Arabs identified tribally and religiously to soon go on to adopt an Arab national identity and then eventually a Palestinian national identity. And the Jews were Jews. Israel did not yet exist. Both of these people, the Arabs and the Jews, lived under the Ottoman Empire. Neither one having sovereignty or control over that territory. And in fact, neither one had sovereignty or control over that territory for at least 400 years for the Arabs. And for the Jews, 2,000 years earlier, when our sovereignty ended in 135 of the Common Era. So, two peoples, Arab, Jewish, where did the conflict come from? What are we fighting over in this conflict? Well, there's one very simple answer. It's one of multiple reasons. First is land. This is a conflict over land. I just said it. There's a territory between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea that both peoples, Jews and Arabs, Jews and now Palestinians, Israelis and Palestinians, believe is their home. And they both have a history there. For the Jewish people, the history begins 3,000 years ago. 1,000 years before the Common Era, when the kingdom of Israel emerged in that land. This is all verifiable history. I am not speaking about theology today. That is not my role. There's a rabbi here who can talk theology with whatever you want. That's not my place. I'm a historian. I will not go back to non-verifiable history. It's why I'm not talking about Abraham right now. Because I can't prove that Abraham existed. Many of us might believe that, but I can't prove it. I'm going back to verifiable history. The kingdom of Israel created 1,000 years before the Common Era and was a kingdom of the Jewish people. It united us into one people. And in that moment, the Jewish people became indigenous to that land. Why? Because we were created as a people in that land. Our language, our culture, our tradition stem from that land. The Jews have been living in that land continuously for the last 3,000 years, uninterrupted. And they are intrinsically connected to that land. There are certain traditions that Jews cannot practice unless they are in the land of Israel. It is their one and only home. For the 2,000 plus years that we have spent in exile as a Jewish people, we have yearned to return to our home, and that's what Zionism was. Zionism is the idea of Jews yearning to return to their home. Modern Zionism took that notion and modernized it, given a modern notion, nationalism, the nation state. That was emerging. We were watching the fall of empires, and Jews said the Jews should have a nation state just like any other people. Should have a nation state. The Jews should have a nation state. Where? In their one and only ancestral home, where Jews have lived continuously for 3,000 years. And the only place where Jews have any claims. We're not from anywhere else. Let me state this very explicitly for everyone in this room. Jewish is not a religion. Jews are a people with a religion. Our religion is Judaism. You do not have to believe in Judaism to be a Jew. To be a Jew, you either have to be born Jewish or you join the Jewish people through conversion. So Jews are a people with a religion. And as a people, we are a nation connected to a land. That's part of people. And our land is the land of Israel. Again, indigenous to it, been there for 3,000 years, the one and only home the Jews know. As Jews lived in exile, every time we prayed in the direction of Israel. When we sit down during our traditions, during our holidays, we always talk about it. Many of us will sit down to a Passover Seder in 3 weeks from now, and the last words that will come out of our mouth at the end of that Passover Seder is next year in Jerusalem. And you might say that's religion, but I guarantee you there's at least one Jew in this room who's probably going to sit at that Passover Seder who doesn't believe in God. It's culture. It's a people. That's what we are. And Jews are deeply connected to the land of Israel. It's our home. It's always been our home, and it will always be our home. But we were thrown out of our home on multiple occasions. The Babylonians threw us out of our home, sent us into exile, and that's how we end up with the Mizrahi Jews of the world today. The Jews who ended up in the Mesopotamia area, the Jews who ended up in Iran, Iraq, modern day Iran, Iraq, eventually down in the Arabian Peninsula, Yemen, into North Africa, and we end up with, again, Mizrahi Jews. Meanwhile, 600 years later, there was another exile, this time by the Romans, and the Jews were exiled, this time predominantly to Europe. And you end up with Jews who eventually look like me. It is wrong to say Jews are white. Jews are multiracial with one origin, the land of Israel. You might say, but Charlotte, you're speaking English. Charlotte, you're not practicing that culture. But I went to the bathroom downstairs, and when I came out, I said a prayer in the language of Hebrew. And this morning, when I woke up, the first words that came out of my mouth were which is something we say every day to thank God that our eyes opened up and we are alive. My culture is culture from that land. Every other culture that I speak is because I was exiled from my land and was forced to acculturate to the places that I ended up. And in this case, the United States, and that's why I speak English. But I also speak Hebrew, and if you ask any Jew in this room, I guarantee you that growing up, they were probably taught Hebrew at one point or another, and they know how to read and write it. And I guarantee you they don't know how to read or write or speak the languages of the European country that their family ended up in. So please, I ask for people to stop telling Jews that they're European, because they're not. The culture that we practice is a Middle Eastern culture. That is our home. Jews were exiled. Some Jews remained, but most of us ended up in exile. And while that happened, eventually other people came and conquered the land that was our home. We said it, the Babylonians, then the Persians, then the Greeks, then the Romans. The Romans adopted Christianity and they turned into the Byzantine Empire. Then it was the Christians. And then in the 7th century of the Common Era, 638 of the Common Era, Arab Muslims from the Arabian Peninsula will come into this territory under the guise of Omar the Great, the second caliph of the Rashidun Caliphates, the caliphates that emerged immediately after Muhammad's death, and they will conquer that land from the Byzantine Christians. They colonize that land. They will bring Arabic to that land. They will bring Arab culture and Muslim culture to that land. And the people who live there will be Arabized and or Islamicized. So there are some Palestinians today who absolutely can trace their roots back thousands of years in the land, because they were there. And then they either adopted or were forced to adopt another culture. To be indigenous, you can speak the language of the land. Arabic is not the language of the land of Israel. It's the language of the Arabian Peninsula. People were colonized by Arabs too. Today we love to talk about white colonization. I think we should talk about all colonization, regardless of the color of the skin of the people. Because I'm not sure why color of skin bears any weight on whether or not you are an oppressed or an oppressor. We have both. Black people can be the oppressor, white people can be the oppressor, Arabs can be the oppressor, Jews can be the oppressor. And judging people by the color of their skin, man, I thought that was a thing of the past. Somehow we come full circle. I like to judge people by the content of their character and their actions. So today, when a Palestinian says, well, I'm native to this land, I agree, you are native to this land. Of course you are. Some, again, have lived there from time immemorial. They can only trace their roots back to that land. Some can trace their roots back to the 7th century, like the Nusibas, who are a tribe that lives now in the area of Jerusalem. Sari Nuseba is somebody who wrote an amazing book called Once Upon a Country, which is an amazing narrative for the Palestinians. It's actually very modern when it comes to his relationship with Israel. And you also have those who can trace their roots back 100 years when they showed up during the immigrations of the 20th century. I'm going to stress something right now. I don't care what people arrive. The reality is that Jews have a deep connection to that land, and Arab Palestinians today have a deep connection to that land. And anyone trying to negate one or the other, move on. It is a moot point. And I stress that also because I function on the foundation that with this conflict, there are 7 million Jews and approximately 7 million Arabs today who live between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And no one should have to leave. Not one person should have to leave. So we have to find a way to share that land. Now I talked about Zionism. We talked about root cause number one, which is land. Now I explained to you why each one is connected to that land, rightfully so. Now let's talk about the second root cause. Nationalism. The idea of statehood. Because we all live there now. If it was just living on the land, we wouldn't have a problem. But it's about living on that land and having a state on that land. And the Jews insist on it. I am a Zionist because I am a Jew, and I have the right to self-determination just like any other people have the right to self-determination. But I'm also a Zionist for one fundamental reason. Because what the world demonstrated to us 80 years ago, if I go back, I would argue is still demonstrating to us today, is that without a Jewish state, Jews are not safe in this world. It was 2,000 years of persecution. It was 2,000 years of everywhere we went being killed or expelled, slaughtered, tortured, gassed, burned. And no, I'm not talking about the Holocaust. I'm talking about the 14th century. I'm talking about the Black Plague, where Jews were gassed and burned because we were blamed for spreading the Black Plague. And you see, every single time it happened, it was a minority. It was never the majority that persecuted the Jews. The problem was that the majority usually sat back and watched it happen. And then people like to say to me today, but Charlotte, come on, it's the 21st century. We've progressed, right? We have places like America. Of course America would take in the Jews. America didn't take in the Jews during the Holocaust. They didn't even take the Jews after the Holocaust. The only way to get into this country post-Holocaust was you needed somebody to sponsor you. As Jews were rotting in displaced persons camps in Europe. Jews don't have a place to go. I said, well, American Jews, sure, for how long? Tell me how long Jews are going to be safe in this country. And if you can't guarantee me a timeline, well, that's why I decided. And I want you to say that to Libyan Jews. Oh, right, there are no more left. All the Libyan Jews are gone. 0 Jews live in Libya because they were either forced to flee or they were killed. So let's understand that there are Jews till this day who still desperately need a Jewish state because when they need to flee persecution, it's the only country that will for sure take them in. So I'm a Zionist. I will never ever be okay with a Jewish state not existing in this world. I will fight to the death for it. And that is exactly, by the way, why most Jews today stand and support what Israel is doing against Hamas and Gaza. Because Hamas's stated goal in their charter is to wipe out the Jews. And you know what I learned? Being a scholar of the Holocaust, that when somebody says that they're going to wipe you out, believe them. And don't wait until it's too late. So we have a Jewish state. And we will fight Hamas until they're gone because they have vowed that they will destroy us. They said it 20 days after October 7th, that they will do October 7th again and again and again. The Jews have every right to a state, but more importantly, the Jews are one of the few people in this world who absolutely need a country because the world has spent 2,000 years abandoning them. And I have no problem calling it out. Because maybe, just maybe, the world might wake up and stop, but guess what? They're not, because the UN resolution that was just passed called for a ceasefire, which was basically telling Israel to lay down their arms and to let Hamas regroup and to continue to live alongside us. It would be like saying to the Americans after bombing Dresden, stop. Let the Nazis regroup. It doesn't matter that they're trying to kill you. Too many innocent people have died. And what they did in Dresden is nowhere close to how much Israel had tried to prevent civilian casualties in Gaza. Palestinians also have a right to a state. There are people who have the right to self-determination. And the attempt at creating that state has happened over and over and over again. It started in 1937. That was the first attempt to partition the land. And in 1937, I'm going to jump real ahead with slides, but I just want to, this is a really good visual aid. 19 is all the stuff I just talked about. But 1937, the Peel Commission was proposed. Divide the land in two. 20% to the Jews, 75% to the Arabs, 5% to the British, and the Palestinian Arabs can have a state and the Jews can have a state. It was rejected by the Arab leadership. And a revolt was going on, and the revolt continued for the next 2 years. So the first attempt where the Palestinians could have had 75% of the land rejected. Why? The statement was very clear. No, we are not going to support a Jewish state being established in any part of this land. And you could look at the Arab leadership, their own quotes, when they rejected this offer. Let's jump 10 years later. After the Holocaust, there's another attempt, 1947. The Jews are offered 55% of the land, the Arabs 45% of the land. The Jews agree to this plan. The Arab leadership rejects this plan. And the day after this plan is passed, on November 29, 1947, the day after, on November 30th, a war is started by Palestinian Arabs. It starts when two buses of Jews, you can Google this, that's exactly why I'm going to give you the details right now. Two buses full of Jews were traveling from Netanya to Jerusalem after having celebrated the passing of the partition plan. They were ambushed on the roads by Arab militias, and the war begins. So the war of 1948 began by Palestinian Arabs who rejected the notion of a Jewish state emerging in any part of this land. Now you might say, well, this isn't fair. It says right there that the Arabs were 2/3 of the population. Why did they only get 45% of the land? There's two arguments. One, 60% of the land that was given to Jews was desert. It wasn't the same quality land, but the same quality land was equal for the Jews and the Arabs. More importantly, I would look at them and I'd say, okay, go back and counteroffer. Don't wage a war. But they did say that it wasn't enough. They said they wanted it all. And they said that as they waged this war. As the Arab countries went into the war, this war, they called this a war of annihilation. You can look it up for yourself, Rahman Azam, the head of the Arab League. And I will continue to give you sources because I will stress, you should never take somebody's word for it when they're talking about this conflict. Force them to give you sources. You can look it up for yourself. I'm telling you to not believe me. Rahman Azam, the head of the Arab League, said it. He also, by the way, said after the war, when there was the whole conversation about letting the refugees return, he specifically stated that when the refugees return, they will act as saboteurs from within, which is one of the many reasons that Israel rejected this claim of return by the Arabs. They said, sorry, you just tried to destroy our country in a war, and now they're saying that you're going to be saboteurs, a fifth column from within. And we don't have to allow people into our country who are going to be disloyal to the country and try to destroy it from within. Again, you don't have to take my word for it. The leader of the Arab League said it himself. So again, I stress, Palestinians have the right to statehood. They have the right to self-determination. If I was a Zionist and I said otherwise, I would be a hypocrite. Jewish right to self-determination, but not to the Palestinians, that's not okay. And I would challenge that to, by the way, the Zionists in the room and to people who might be pro-Palestinian in this room. That if you deny the other side their right to self-determination, you're a hypocrite. I don't care who I just defended. And more often than not, I actually defend the Zionists when I say that. So here we are. True story. This was attempt number 2. There was another war 18 years later. A war started this time by Egypt, when Egypt closed that little waterway, the Straits of Tiran, which was an act of war against Israel. Eventually, Israel preemptively strikes the Egyptian in a preventative warfare measure. Their allies, Jordan and Syria, join in this war. It lasts a total of 6 days, and it becomes known as the Six-Day War. In this war, Israel gains a tremendous amount of territory from those Arab countries, because I want you to notice that before the war, the land that was meant to become part of the Palestinian state was captured by the Egyptians and the Jordanians. And in those 18 years, by the way, they never once withdrew from that territory and handed it over to the Palestinians to have their own country. And the reason why they didn't do that is relatively simple. If you look at the origins of the Palestinian national movement, they don't really talk about a state of Palestine in the West Bank and Gaza until 1988, when Yasser Arafat goes to the UN and tries to declare a country in the West Bank and Gaza. In fact, in 1964, when the PLO was created, their charter specifically stated that they were going to liberate Palestine through armed struggle, and they didn't talk about the West Bank and Gaza. They spoke only about what was Israel at that time, which is the territory as you see here in yellow. So of course, Egypt and Jordan didn't give that territory up to the Palestinians because that's not what they were demanding. The demand was that Israel should stop existing, and again, you can look it up for yourself in the PLO charter, 1964. I want you to also notice that the Palestine Liberation Organization was created in 1964, 3 years before the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza began, which tells you everything about what they were trying to liberate. But after this war, after Israel gained a tremendous amount of territory in a defensive war that Israel didn't want and didn't ask for, they immediately turned to their Arab partners and said to their neighbors, they were definitely not partners. and said, let's make peace. Let's exchange land for peace. We'll give you land and you guys can give us recognition and peace. And the response was no. No to peace, no to recognition, no to negotiation. As far as we're concerned, Israel doesn't exist. We're not negotiating with you. I was like, okay, we'll wait. Then some Arab countries did. Egypt becomes the first, 1979, they make peace with Israel. And Israel shows a willingness to withdraw from territory as they pull out of the entire Sinai Peninsula and hand it over to the Egyptians, and we've had peace with Egypt ever since. A cold peace, but a peace nonetheless. 15 years later, the Jordanians. And the Jordanians also made peace with them in 1994. But the Jordanians at this point do not ask for the West Bank, just like the Egyptians didn't ask for Gaza. Because by the time you get to 1979 and 1994, the Palestinian national movement has been solidified. The Palestinian identity has been solidified. And they say that territory should be for the Palestinians. And that's when Israel starts to negotiate directly with the Palestinians in the 1990s, starting in Oslo. Now, this is yet another time where Israel is going to withdraw from territory and show a willingness to negotiate. In the Oslo Accords, Israel enables the Palestinian Authority to be created under the guise of Yasser Arafat, who was the head of the chairman of the PLO, who then becomes president of the Palestinian Authority. And with now a governing body, a civil government, the Palestinian Authority, Israel agrees to withdraw from territory. And Israel withdraws from 40% of the West Bank and 80% of the Gaza Strip, handing the territory over to the Palestinian Authority to govern themselves. And this was supposed to be the first step towards peace. Govern yourselves. And eventually, if you govern yourselves and can effectively stop terrorism and violence, then we can continue to negotiate. The opposite happened. We ended up with more terrorism, more violence. In fact, more people died in the years following Oslo, in the 7 years of Oslo from 1983 to the year 2000. More Israelis were killed in terrorism than in the 15 years before. So the message that Israelis received was, when you try to make peace, we're going to get more violence. And the saddest part is, so many people today point to the right in Israel, especially some of the more extreme right-wing individuals who are part of our government. And I look at them and I say, do you know why the right in Israel has been able to grow the way that it's been able to grow? Because every time the left tried to make peace, more bodies, more death. So yeah, it's hard to believe that pulling out of territory is going to give us peace. So we've had 1937, 1947, 1967. We've now talked about the middle of the 1990s. Oslo falls apart because of the terror. But then an Israeli leader steps up to try to end this conflict. His name is Ehud Barak. And Ehud Barak offers another peace agreement. This time he offers the Palestinians 100% of the Gaza Strip, 97% of the West Bank with land swaps, $30 million to resettle Palestinian refugees in the newly established state of Palestine in the West Bank and Gaza, and a shared capital in Jerusalem. It was rejected by Assad. He walked away from the negotiating team. And he came back to Ramallah. And within a few months, he started the Second Intifada, a war of terror that will take the lives of over 1,000 Israelis, including my 3 friends. I missed a suicide bombing by 10 minutes. It happened on the bus that I took to school. It was that bus. And I didn't make this slideshow back. I remember flipping through it. My jaw went on the floor. Number 32 out of Gila. A terrorist from Bethlehem had walked into my neighborhood, boarded that bus, and murdered 17 people from my community. Half of them were children on their way to school. This war of terror led to a massive increase in Israeli counterterror. Because like I said, the job of counterterrorism was the Palestinian Authority's job. They committed to it in Oslo. That they were supposed to stop terror. That they were supposed to stop inciting terror, and they were supposed to arrest terrorists, but they didn't. And so 1,000 Israelis are murdered, and in the process, Israel has to kick up its counterterrorism. And what does that look like? That looks like even more checkpoints. That looks like Israeli soldiers inside of cities facing riots every single day that include, yeah, sure, full-grown men, but also this kid. I don't know why a 13, 14-year-old kid is in this position. Well, no, I know exactly why he's in this position. He's being used as a human shield. And as we were burying our casualties, so were the Palestinians. And this became 4.5 years of grief. 4.5 years of utter sorrow, of immense frustration. And for the Palestinians, even more so. Because you had to stand at checkpoints every day to try to get to school, to try to get to work. You had to come face to face with Israeli soldiers who maybe treated you well. A lot of friends who are Israeli soldiers, I know they're treating people with dignity and respect. I also know some soldiers who are not. And I would hope that my government, my army would stop them. And I know some do, but some don't. And I know Palestinians who have been harassed and humiliated at checkpoints. Unacceptable. You want to protect yourself, protect yourself. No humiliation is necessary. In fact, just the opposite. It's actually deepening this time. At night, we would do arrests inside of communities. Why? Because again, the PA wasn't doing it. So we would go into cities. We'd go into refugee camps and we'd make arrests. And imagine you're a Palestinian sleeping sound asleep in your bed and you get woken up by Israeli soldiers storming into your house and pulling you out of your bed. Imagine you're a kid and you're watching this happen and you watch as your father gets dragged away by Israeli soldiers. How are you going to feel? Now for us, your father's a terrorist. But for you, he's your hero. And these people who you've been raised to hate through incitement in your textbooks, which again, also please look it up for yourself. I'll never forget a math problem that I read once in a Palestinian textbook. It said something to the tune of, if you have 5 Jews and you kill 3 of them, how many are left? You learn word problems in like 2nd or 3rd grade, correct me if I'm wrong. That's just on the foundation of, maps that completely erase Israel. Shows that have Mickey Mouse lookalike characters that encourage Palestinian kids to become martyrs. Also something you could look up, very easy thing to find, by the way, because Disney sued them. Because Disney sued them for the rights of Mickey Mouse. And you know what they did when they had to take Mickey Mouse off of the air? They had someone who was called an Israeli settler murder Hartford, the Mickey Mouse lookalike. Not kidding. You could again go watch the film, go watch the show. So I'm a little kid, and I have this show that I watched of this Mickey Mouse lookalike called Farford, and then a Jewish settler murders Farford. I don't know about you. I was watching Sesame Street, and no one was being murdered on Sesame Street. I shouldn't make a film. Probably the worst form of child abuse is teaching a kid to hate. And I want to stress something. I'm an Israeli. I grew up in Israeli school systems. I was never taught to hate. In fact, just the opposite. Palestinians were humanized to me in my school. I learned alongside Arabs. I was never taught to hate a Palestinian. The only day that I ever started to feel any kind of hatred towards Palestinians was the day that I put my friend into the ground after having been murdered by Palestinian terrorists. And I should also stress that I spent the last 20 years of my life in therapy trying to ensure that I don't hate Palestinians. It is so incredibly frustrating for me to hear somebody say, well, look at what you've been doing to them for 70 years. What do you expect? I don't expect you to rape and murder people. And it would never have been okay for me to pick up a gun or pick up a knife and go kill a random Palestinian because another random Palestinian murdered my friends. It's a despicable, disgusting excuse for violence. Get over it. Stop trying to defend rape. Accept the fact that sometimes there's bad people on your side. Just like I can stand here and say there are bad Israelis who have done horrible things. And I don't have to try to justify it away by saying that it didn't happen. Rape happened on October 7th. Where's the face of the people who were raped? Why aren't they coming out and speaking about it? Well, maybe for 2 reasons. One, because it's really hard to speak about a trauma like that. And maybe 2, because they know they're getting ridiculed. And oh wait, that's exactly what just happened. I meet Susanna, the first brave woman who was willing to step up and speak about what happened to her in captivity. About a man sitting her on the side of a bathtub, forcing her to undress, and every time he grabbed her, she tried to push away, and he punched her in the face. where she was forced to perform a sexual act with a gun to her head. Read her testimony in the New York Times. And I would hope that you would believe her, like I'm pretty sure we tend to believe women. And I hope that Jews and Israeli women are included in that. I'm sick and tired of the denial. We have more evidence than ever before. Enough denying it, accept it, own it. There are some disgusting, despicable, barbaric people who are part of Hamas. It's not hard to condemn them. By doing that, you are actually doing a service to the Palestinians. You are doing a service to their cause. So we ended up with 5 years of intifada. Both Palestinians, Israelis suffering through it. And then Israel tried again. Even after that, right? People say, oh, after 70 years of violence, this is what you get. Well, after 5 years of violence, what did the Israelis do? We didn't get more violence. We tried to make peace. And we proposed the 2008 Olmert offer to the current president of the Palestinian Authority, who's still in office. And what was the offer? 100% of the Gaza Strip, because we had already withdrawn. Remember, we withdrew in 2005. Oh, right, I skipped over. Let's recall that before this offer was even made, Israel unilaterally withdrew from the Gaza Strip entirely. Every single Israeli soldier and settler was pulled out of that territory. It was left Jew-free for a year. Why a year? Because then a Jew was involuntarily taken into Gaza. His name was Gilad Shalit, and he was kidnapped and he was held there as a hostage for 5.5 years. But from that point on, not one Israeli soldier, not one Israeli settler. Where's the occupation? Or are you talking about the blockade? The blockade that Israel implemented a 1.5 years later after Hamas finally took over the Gaza Strip? After they had launched rockets into Israel? After they had already kidnapped Gilad Shalit a year earlier? That blockade? The blockade that ensured that Hamas wouldn't get more weapons? Right? The weapons that we knew that they were going to use against us, already because they did on October 7th? Don't call me paranoid. Don't tell me that there wasn't a reason for these blockades. There was a reason to stop the murderous terrorist organization who just showed us exactly what they would want to do to us from getting those weapons to be able to do that. So we pulled out of Gaza without any agreement from the other side. We got nothing in return. We got more rockets, we got a Hamas takeover, and then still Israel offers the best peace agreement the Palestinians will ever have. 100% of the Gaza Strip, 100% of the West Bank with land swaps. We were going to build, crazy enough, a tunnel into the bay to connect the two territories. Apparently that would not have been hard for Hamas to do engineering-wise. Man, if only they had invested all of that money and all of that time above ground. And yet still, 100% and 100%. A state of their own. And another rejection. So don't tell me this is about 75 years of oppression. Don't tell me this is about 75 years of Israel not trying to give the Palestinians a state. It's 75 years of Israel trying to give the Palestinians a state while also trying to survive. And here's the thing. If you chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, we're never going to agree. Because I'm not going anywhere. My country's going to exist. Accept it or understand that this will go on forever and I will have a country. And if you actually want the Palestinians to have a country, then you should be for my country and for their country. It's not hard. Be pro-Israel, be Zionist, and be pro-Palestinian. I stand here and I stand up every single day on that platform. It's not that complicated. I think we all learned how to share when we were 3 years old. Since this time and this rejection, Israelis have become more and more less hopeful about this. It's been tragic to watch first. As somebody who watched us get very close to recovering from our wounds with the second intifada. Now I've watched another generation of Israelis be traumatized. Another generation of Israelis who genuinely don't believe that peace is possible. Every rejection reinforced that. And then came October 7th. And now we have one goal. That one goal is the elimination of Hamas and returning our hostage. Anyone who stands here and would look at me and say something like Israel doesn't really care about the hostages, you can get out. I go to bed every single night with fear Boss's head in my face in my head. I cannot stop thinking about that little ginger kid. And if you don't know his name, then you don't know what's going on in Israel right now. If you're wondering who that is, then you definitely haven't been following. He's the youngest hostage. He turned 1 year old in captivity a month ago. He was taken hostage as an 8-month-old, strapped to his mother's lap, along with his 3-year-old brother. And I cannot go a day without thinking of fear and Ariel. I cannot go a day thinking about Larry Alban, who's probably being raped every single day in Gaza right now. We care about our hostages. But we also care about the rest of Israelis. And we have a remarkable dilemma put in front of us. They kidnapped a soldier, June 25th, 2006. I mentioned him. His name was Gilad Shalit. That was the first time that I wore a dog tag in my life. I was a student myself. And my dog tag had 3 names on it: Gilad Shalit, Eldad Regev, and Edward Bonifaz. Gilad was kidnapped by Hamas. Regev and Bonifaz were kidnapped by Hezbollah on July 11th, 2006. Gilad Shalit rotted in Hamas captivity for 5.5 years. He barely saw the light of day. He was emaciated when he came out of Gaza. Never once was the Red Cross able to access him. Still to this day, by the way, I'm waiting for the day that Hamas gives the Red Cross access to our hospital. Get Gilad Shalit out of jail, out of captivity, out of being held hostage. Israel had to release 1,027 Hamas terrorists. These are not political prisoners. I implore all of you to look up the Ramallah lynching that took place in October of 2000. It was a lynching of 2 soldiers who accidentally went into Gaza. They went into Ramallah and ended up in a police station. A mob formed around that police station, entered into the police station, and beat them to death with their bare hands. One of them proudly stuck his hands outside the window and proudly celebrated how he had just murdered an Israeli soldier with his bare hands. That man was released in the Gilad Shalit. The other man who was released in the Gilad Shalit was a man named Yahya Sinwar. And if you don't know that name, then you are definitely not following this time. Yahya Sinwar was the head of Hamas in Gaza. He planned the October 7th attack. He was at the top of the list. So when you say we don't care about hostages, I want you to understand something. You are every single day using our humanity and our morality against us. Save these 134 who are still being held hostage. 99 that are still alive, 35 have been declared dead. But what about the people? We got one back in 2011. We released Yahya Sinwar and 1,200 more Israelis stepped down in Lebanon. Hamas knows exactly what position they're putting us in. You know the saddest part? Is Hamas knows our morality better than anyone else. Why did they dig tunnels underground? Why did they embed themselves underneath the population? Because they knew that Israel would hesitate to bomb. It didn't work. It didn't work this time. Israel we didn't allow it to stop us. What did we do? We ordered an evacuation of northern Gaza. Get out. We're coming in. I'm going to end this by saying that I've been accused of supporting genocide on this campus. I'm a Jew. I'm a historian. I have studied genocide. It was coined by a man named Raphael Lemkin, a Jew, to describe the genocide committed against the Jewish people in the 1940s. Genocide comes with intent. It's not about how many people die. It's about intention to kill, wipe out entirely or partially a group of people. If you are trying to wipe out a group of people, you do not order them to evacuate. Now, somebody's probably going to say, well, you were bombing the evacuation routes. There is zero evidence to support the claim that Israel bombed the evacuation routes. We know that there were bombs on the evacuation routes. We know that one photo, one video of a bomb on an evacuation route that blew up was analyzed by independent investigators who said that this bomb did not come from the air. You can watch the video over and over and over again, and you will not see a rocket coming down from the sky. That bomb was planted on the ground. Hamas has admitted, and Gazans have admitted that Hamas has prevented them from evacuating. So who's actually bombing the evacuation routes? The people who dug an entire tunnel city underground to use their people above as human shields? Or the people who ordered an evacuation of all of those people so they couldn't be used as human shields? If we were committing a genocide, we would be targeting and killing massive amounts of innocent civilians. As of now, the number out of Gaza is somewhere around 33,000 people who are victims, and that's the number that comes from Hamas, who leads the Gaza Health. I actually think that number is probably close to half. I'm not challenging that. What I'm challenging is that those are not all innocent civilians, and we know that for a fact because Hamas has admitted that they're not all innocent civilians. They don't say that to the media. They have said it to the media. It's weird. They say 33,000 innocent civilians, but then they claim 6,000 of them as Hamas terrorists. Israel estimates that that's probably double that number, just like when Putin says how many of his soldiers have been killed. He usually underestimates it by half. Israel has more intelligence to tell us that somewhere between 13,000 and 14,000 Hamas terrorists have been killed in this war. I want to stress something. That means that close to 20,000 innocent people. I don't live well with that number. I don't sit there and celebrate it like some very few fringe horrible Israelis might. I don't brush it aside like some Israelis might right now just because they simply can't handle all of this. They're too consumed with grief. They're too consumed with the hostages. Give them a year. And if somebody doesn't understand what I just said, I'm sorry, but to demand of people the ability to feel that amount of empathy or that amount of compassion at one time, it's just not there. But that number doesn't sit well. But I'm also a scholar in this. And I understand how warfare is fought. And this type of warfare is unprecedented. We have never fought a war like this, ever in the history of warfare. There has never been a situation where the combatants had literally built an entire underground city. And let me explain when I say that. I'm not just making things up. The terror tunnel network under Gaza is somewhere between 350 and 450 miles long. The New York subway system is 248 miles long. Again, if only Hamas had invested above ground instead of below ground. This is unprecedented. And still, let's look at this ratio. Because this is how we gauge success in this type of war. For every one combatant that is killed, how many innocent civilians are killed? Because again, when you're fighting against terrorists, you're not fighting on a battlefield. You're fighting in cities because that's where the terrorists draw you into. I would love if Hamas came out to a battlefield. It would make our lives much easier. But they don't wear uniforms. They don't identify themselves. So for every one combatant in Gaza, Israel has killed 2 innocent civilians, 2 non-combatants. Somebody asked me a few weeks ago, am I proud of Israeli counterterrorism given what's happened in Gaza, considering that we pride ourselves on our counterterrorism? And my response was, yes, I am. You know why? Because that's the lowest ratio in the history of warfare. The only lower ratio was 1-to-1, and it was also set by Israel in Gaza in 2008, 2014, 2021. The American ratio in Raqqa and Mosul, where, by the way, they did order the evacuation of a lot of innocent civilians, and there wasn't an underground city, was 1-to-3, 1-to-4. I honestly don't know how much better we could be doing. The tragedy, though, is when there are 30,000 Hamas fighters who, again, have embedded themselves within the civilian population. Well, if the ratio stays 1-to-2, that is that's 60,000 instances. So what does Israel try to do? We tried to arrest Hamas terrorists. We just arrested 600 in Shifa Hospital just last week. And every time we arrest them, you know what we have to do? We have to strip them to ensure that they don't have suicide bombs or weapons on them. And then when we do that, we are also condemned. So should we arrest them and take them in to be charged, or should we kill them? You've left us no option when you say don't do either. I'm going to defend myself. And I say I because I am a citizen of the state of Israel. And it could have been me that day on October 7th being raped and killed. And so I'm going to defend myself. If Hamas put up their arms today, surrendered and released the hostages, the war could end tomorrow. You want a ceasefire? It's a very easy solution. Hamas surrender, release the hostages. Israel has said over and over again from the first day, all it takes is Hamas to surrender and release the hostages, and this war will end. No, well, one more person has to die. So I ask anyone in this room who is pro ceasefire why they have not spent the last 6 months calling for a Hamas surrender and to release the hostages. I want this war to end. I want this war to end where I can look at the faces of the 100,000 Israelis in the South who have had to evacuate their homes and are living as internally displaced people in Israel. I want to be able to look them in the face and say, you can go home and you can feel safe. And I want to be able to look at Palestinians and say, you can now live a better future in Gaza without this tyrannical regime ruling over you, spending most of their time and their effort building a city underground to use you as human shields rather than actually making terror. And I would hope that if you sit in this room and care about Palestinians, that you would also demand that Hamas relinquish their control and surrender, because that would be better, way better for Palestinians and definitely better for Israelis. I dream of that. I hope it comes to. Every day that it doesn't, more people are dying. All of them. Thank you. I'm happy to take any question. Yeah.
Kind of. Why hasn't Egypt taken any of the? Why won't Egypt take refugees? I know, first of all, they people. Why would they? Why aren't they taking refugees? And also, how? What do you think is going to happen next? Do you think Israel will end up having to invade Rafah? And how? I guess.
Yeah.
What do you think that? It's a lot of people.
Yeah. So your first question about Egypt. I think there's a very valid argument to be made for the Palestinians, which is the last time the Palestinians fled a war, they weren't able to come back. And that's very valid. And so I have never made the claim, the argument that Egypt should be taking them in. I wish there was some mechanism where they could take them in with a guarantee that they would return, but I can't make that guarantee and I don't know who would. So that's a problem. I will say there is a whole black market going on right now about getting through the Egypt border. And if you want to get through the Egyptian border, it just takes a certain amount of money. And you have to bribe people to get across, which is really sad. That is happening. And tragically also, I would say there was at least one terrorist who was targeted in an airstrike, who was in a hospital, and they claimed that he was a journalist, and he was given a fast track out of Gaza, and he's now in Qatar. Terrorist, not an innocent civilian. A man who is part of Hamas, who is now being harbored by Hamas in Qatar. And you can look up his name, he was claimed as a Hamas terrorist back. Your second question was, what's next? I am very much a historian, and I don't try to say that I have a crystal ball and I know what's going to happen. What I will say is that there are 4 Hamas battalions left in Gaza, full functioning battalions that are left in Gaza, and they are in Rafah. If Israel wants to eliminate Hamas, there's no eliminating Hamas without eliminating those 4 battalions. There's no eliminating Hamas without capturing or killing Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Hafez, who is another military commander in Hamas who has evaded Israel. In fact, his name is Mohammed Daif. Daif means the guest. And he was called the guest because he could never sleep in one place more than one night without being targeted by Israel. Great. It's your fine, all good, it happens. So I don't know, I can tell you that if the goal remains to eliminate Hamas, it's either gonna take a Hamas surrender or Israel eliminating those 4 battalions. If I had to guess, I am guessing that Israel has probably spent the last 2 months trying to devise a plan for Rafah. A plan that would enable us to go in and eliminate those Hamas battalions with minimal civilian casualties. That is going to be an incredibly hard operation. That being said, everything about this war we thought was going to be much more difficult, and we thought there would be much more casualties on both sides. But I don't see this war ending unless Hamas surrenders without us going to Rafah. It's just a matter of when and how. I genuinely wish Hamas could just walk out to a battlefield and fight us. It would make our jobs a lot easier. And I don't understand, I really struggle every day why people who claim to be pro-Palestinian don't every single day shout at the rooftops about Hamas using human shields. Because every day that you don't shout at the rooftops about Hamas using human shields, you're incentivizing them to keep doing it. Every day that you blame Israel for those casualties, Hamas says, okay, it's working. They're not blaming us, they're blaming Israel, so let's keep using human shields. And that gets more innocent Palestinians killed. I just don't understand it. If somebody can explain the logic to me, I would appreciate it. Because I don't get it. Hamas, by the way, has also come out and stated explicitly that they use human shields. They're not even shy about it. So yeah, Rafah is going to be a major situation, because again, you have many people being used as human shields, hiding those 4 Hamas battalions underneath them in Hamas terror tunnels, where, by the way, also it is believed that the 99 live Israeli hostages are being held. And I try to keep this not personal when I was talking about the hostages, but I have a friend whose brother is being held hostage. And again, when I say it's personal, it is personal. And when you say these hostages aren't real, again, I know his name, I know his face. In fact, he looks just like his brother. Which is why when I saw his video of him being kidnapped, I thought it was my friend. It was me. These are real people. Yeah.
I think the reason that people blame Israel for the killing of the human shield is because they are choosing to bomb the human shield. Hamas may be using human shields and surrounding themselves by civilians, but Israel is making the active choice that these children's lives are not as important as killing a terrorist.
It is not a choice.
It's a choice for somebody.
It's the
People
choice.
are making that choice.
It's the choice of living alongside, of basically saying to your people, we cannot keep you safe. It's handing a blank check to all terrorist organizations in the world to say, it's very simple. You can attack anyone you want. All you have to do is just bury yourself underground in front of around a bunch of innocent civilians. And don't worry, you will forever be able to survive.
I believe that putting Israeli lives.
It's not. It's not.
It's saying I'd rather keep you.
It's not. It's very simple. What you're doing is what you're doing is you're putting the onus on Israel instead of putting the onus on Hamas. On October 6th, I wasn't bombing Rafah. On October 6th, I wasn't bombing Northern Gaza. It started on October 7th.
I don't know.
So we thought
who started it is kind of a.
No, it's very simple. Prior to first of all, I just went through the entire history. And if you want to know the first major attack in that land, an organized attack against Jews happened in April of 1920 during the Nabi Musa festival, and it was spurred on by the Islamic leader at the time, Haja Mian, and you can look it up for yourself. I'm sick and tired of this who started it thing.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't. We shouldn't.
No, it matters because somebody did start it. One people came in, not violent, not attacking, with money trying to buy land, and land being sold to them. And if you don't believe it, by the way, there are land deeds that you can look up in Ottoman land records that were taken again by an unbiased source, the Ottomans. And you can see that Jews bought land. And then they were killed by people for being there. And Jews started to defend themselves and have continued to defend themselves ever since. And I want you to notice that that started well before 1948. The first huge massacre of Jews was happened in 1929 in Hebron, where 68 Jews were Hamas probably took their cue from the 1929 massacre. Women's breasts were chopped off, a baby was beheaded, men's eyes. I'm not, you weren't here in the beginning, but we said very clearly that that's not going to happen. And if it is, you're going to be asked to leave. There's gonna be a respect. If you wanna say something, you can raise your hand.
Sure, but you're just spreading.
No, no, I'm not. I literally sourced myself every step of the way, and I have seen the photo of the beheaded baby. I have seen the photo of the beheaded baby. And I said, one beheaded baby. No, you know why? Let me tell you something. I'm a Jew. I don't dangle, no, let me explain. Yes, it is, and I'm about to explain it. Let me talk. We don't show pictures of our dead bodies. The fact that even I saw it, I said, why? This is the baby, it has a name, and I'm not going to use it as propaganda. But I saw it. I also saw the photo of the charred baby who was burned in an oven. Don't get me started.
So then
I have-
President Biden came out with a statement saying that babies were beheaded, and they had to retract that statement.
Because he said babies. And I just said baby.
So
It's
then
not
why are there
complicated.
reports that they were babies?
It actually wasn't, and again, I'm done with this, we're not doing this anymore. I'm gonna say this last statement, and then I'm gonna take a question if somebody who's raising their hand respectfully. One reporter, and I listened to the report over and over and over again, said, we have reports that babies have been killed, including some beheadings. And then foreign media picked it up and said 40 babies beheaded. And by the way, can I just take a second and say, this is the most despicable conversation I've ever had. Babies were murdered. How they were murdered, it only adds to the barbarity of the attack that one was stuck in an oven. And a mother who was being raped alongside the oven listed as her baby.
Against you because babies in Palestine are being bombed.
It doesn't work against me. All you're
No,
saying is that
you're-
there's too much innocent loss of life, and I agree with you. But one being targeted by being put in an oven is very different from one being accidentally killed in an airstrike. And if you don't see the difference in that, then I don't know how to have this conversation. If you don't see the difference of a terrorist taking a baby and sticking it in an oven and turning the oven on versus an airstrike where we're not sure, where we've tried to eliminate the civilian population. If you don't see a difference in that, if you don't see the difference between somebody defending themselves and somebody who is actively, intentionally murdering a baby, then we don't live on the same moral plane and there's no reason for us to continue this conversation. I told you we're done after that, and I was gonna call on somebody who's raising their hand. No, stop going. If they ask you, Haley, it's okay, if they ask you something, please.
I just wanted to talk about how, okay, I
Yeah.
find it interesting that Hamas has been called terrorists and a lot of words, but it's always been condemned when talking about the IDF or Israel because they have the right to defend themselves. But when Palestinians, because 54 Palestinians have voted that Hamas is their only protector, actually protects themselves. But when they do so, they're always considered terrorists. I feel like it's so much easier to call Arabs or Muslims terrorists because of those stereotypes.
By the way, I called Baruch Goldstein, who's a Jewish terrorist who murdered 29 people in the Cave of the Patriarchs in 1994. He's a terrorist, and I have no problem calling him a terrorist. When you intentionally kill innocent civilians, and that's your intention, you're a terrorist. And when you do it for religious or political motivations, that's the definition of terrorist. So I have no problem using that term for anybody if they fit that definition. And Hamas is the definition.
And the Israeli occupation.
So a military who has a code of conduct that specifically states that you are not allowed to target innocent civilians, a code of conduct that every single soldier is forced to memorize, carries it around in their pocket. You can look it up. It's called the spirit of the IDF. You can look it up. Every single soldier is required to not only know it by heart, to be able to repeat it to a commander on command when asked. They carry it around in their pocket. It's a little booklet that unfolds. It has the 7 rules, and one of them is purity of arms, when you're allowed to discharge the weapon, and another one is protection of life. So I'm not trying to say that there are not Israeli soldiers who step out of bounds, and I've said I said during my speech that I have zero problem with them being punished. Because if their intention is politically or religiously motivated and they target and specifically kill innocent civilians, they are terrorists and they should be locked up. And that's what I agree with Amram Ben Eliel, who is the man who killed the Dewapsha family in Duma, who went and set their house on fire and murdered almost an entire family. That man deserves to rot in jail as far as I'm concerned. I have no problem calling out terrorists, but to call the IDF an army that has been formed for the purpose of defending Israel against active aggression, which happened in 1948, 1967, 1973, all wars that were not started by Israel, but that were started by our neighbors. To call them terrorists First of all, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work, doesn't fit the definition of terrorist. You could call them a combatant, which they are. Keep going.
Yeah, sorry, I just have a few more points just before I answer. But the Times of Israel states, and reiterate that Israel denies hostages talks advance as lawmakers. So Israel has.
What date was that? Sorry, because, that changes every day. So just what date was that? January 24th.
And there has also
Because
been.
we have hostage negotiators right now in Doha. As we speak, the head of the Mossad and the head of the Israeli security forces has been shuttling back and forth between Doha and so January 24th is not going to tell you anything. There has been probably 5 or so ceasefire deals that have been accepted by Israel and rejected by Hamas and not going to go back. And if anyone wants to learn about those, I'll share with us Instagram page. We have an explainer that tells you about every single one of those ceasefire attempts and every one of their rejections.
I have a few more questions.
Yeah, no, sure. I'm giving, and when you bring up the swords, I have to check, January is not gonna help us these days, everything moves.
Okay. I know you mentioned a lot of plea deals where Hamas has rejected, but also looking back at history, where Israel has rejected multiple peace deals, like for example, in 1988, in 2006, 2008, 2012.
Hold on. 1988, we're talking about Yasser Arafat going to the UN and declaring independence. That's not a peace agreement. That's him declaring independence unilaterally. So that wasn't a peace agreement. What was the next one?
2006.
2006, they rejected that offer. There it is up on the table, up on the board. Excuse me, 2006 was when we pulled out of Gaza. Definitely not an agreement there that they offered that we rejected. In fact, after we pulled out of Gaza and Hamas took over, all we demanded of Hamas was that they relinquish terror and end the violence against Israel and recognize Israel and that we would treat them as a legitimate government. Like you said, they were democratically elected, but Hamas refused to do so and that they continue to try to wipe out Israel according to their charter. So no, we didn't accept that. You said 2008, I think was the next one? That's the one up on the screen. I'm not sure what you mean because this was an offer made by Israel and it was definitely rejected by the Palestinian Authority. And Mahmoud Abbas admits to this. This isn't even me. You could literally go online and see the Mahmoud Abbas. He actually jotted out this map on a little Palestinian Authority notepad, and you can actually see the image that